The flashlight beam caught on something wet, something trembling. In the far corner of that forgotten barn, tucked behind rusted engine parts and a rotting wheelbarrow, a pair of eyes caught the light like marbles pulled from muddy water. They barely moved. But they watched, silent, sunken, waiting. There was no bark, no whine, just the quiet, hollow echo of breath. Thin ribs moved like shadows under stretched skin. One paw was bent at an unnatural angle, as if the leg had stopped trying to heal and instead just learned how to exist in pain. The air was sour with mildew and old oil. Something had died here, maybe more than once. You could feel it in the walls, like the barn itself remembered the neglect. And yet, in all that rot, that darkness, this tiny, broken thing had held on. He didn't run when I stepped closer. He didn't flinch when my fingers touched the matted fur on his back. He just closed his eyes. And that's when I knew he wasn't scared anymore. He was done. Done hoping. Done fighting. But we weren't. Not yet. It's strange how quiet the world gets when something is suffering. You'd expect noise, a cry, a whimper, some desperate clawing against death. But it's not like that. Not in the barn. Not when I stepped inside that old shell of wood and time and smelled the rot of forgotten things. The air was so still it felt wrong. Even the wind outside had stopped. The sun had already sunk behind the hills, dragging the last warmth with it. I remember the cold, how it crept down the back of my neck and settled in my bones. I almost turned around. But then I saw him, just a shape at first, part of the debris, a pile of darkness too small to matter. It wasn't the sight that stopped me. It was the feeling, like walking into a room and knowing someone had just left, or was still there, watching, waiting, hoping for something that never came. I stepped closer. My boots crouched over dry leaves and broken glass. The light from my flashlight moved across rusted tools and old tires, and then the eyes, they didn't flinch, didn't blink, just stared. The puppy didn't move, not even when I crouched down. His body was wedged between a stack of cinder blocks and a rotting crate. His fur, if you could call it that, was patchy and matted into thick clumps. His front leg was swollen, the bone twisted like a branch bent too far. He looked dead, but I saw it, the smallest rise and fall. A breath. I don't remember what I said. Something stupid, probably. Something like, "Hey, buddy," as if words mattered, as if he cared. But maybe I said it for me, to remind myself that this was real, that I hadn't lost another one. Because there'd been others. Too many others. Sometimes I think rescue work is just a slow erosion of your faith in people. You start out hopeful, thinking you can fix what's broken. Then you find things like this. Things that shatter that hope into pieces so small they slip through your fingers before you can even feel them. But there he was. Still breathing. Still waiting. So I did the only thing I could. I reached out. My fingers brushed his back, and he didn't flinch. That was the part that hurt most. Not the broken leg, not the starvation, but the stillness. He'd given up. I lifted him slowly, cradling the fragile weight against my chest. His body didn't resist. No panic, no struggle. Just limp surrender, like he'd already made peace with the idea that this world wasn't for him. But I wasn't ready to agree. Not yet. Not with those eyes still watching. Not with breath still in his lungs. Not with darkness still pressing in from all sides. He smelled like damp hay and infection. I wrapped him in my jacket and carried him through the barn doors, stepping back into a night that felt colder than any I could remember. The sky above was cloudless, a million stars blinking like distant promises I couldn't trust. I held him tighter. He didn't move. The engine struggled in the cold. It cranked 3 times before catching, headlights flickering like tired eyes. I laid him gently on the passenger seat, bundling him in a threadbare towel I kept in the back for emergencies. This wasn't an emergency. It was something else, something quieter, something closer to being too late. My fingers shook against the steering wheel. Not from the cold, from that kind of fear that feels like grief in advance. When you already know what's coming, but you keep fighting it anyway, because the not knowing gives you just enough room to pretend. I kept glancing at him. Still breathing. That shallow rise and fall, like someone whispering beneath a blanket. His eyes were half closed now, not sleep. Just letting go. I turned the heater up, reached over, touched his ear. "Stay awake," I said. He didn't move. The road unfurled in long stretches of darkness, punctuated by patches of icy fog that smeared across the windshield. I drove one-handed for a while, the other resting gently against his back, feeling the faint tremble in his ribs. I spoke to him, softly, like I used to talk to the night when I was a kid, back when silence was a friend, not a threat. "You don't get to give up," I whispered. "Not after I found you." There was no name yet. He wasn't a buddy or a good boy. He was barely even here. But something in me had already started building the story. Maybe that's how you survive this work. You see the ending before it happens, even if you're lying to yourself the whole time. You imagine the healed dog, the open field, the tail wagging in slow motion. And maybe, he becomes the one who makes it. The vet's office was lit up like a lifeline when I pulled in. Fluorescent light spilled onto the gravel lot. I scooped him up again, careful not to jostle the leg. His head lolled against my chest, breath warm against my collarbone. The front desk tech didn't ask any questions. She just saw my face and called out, "We've got one." It all blurred after that. The smell of antiseptic, the sterile white walls, his weight slipping from my arms onto a silver table. Vets in gloves murmuring things I only half heard: pulse weak, severe dehydration, possible sepsis. They touched his leg, and he let out the tiniest sound, not a whine, just air forced from pain. That sound cracked something open inside me. I stepped out of the room before they could see it, leaned against the wall, palms flat on cool tile. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped in slow rhythm. I stared at a water stain in the ceiling and tried to breathe like someone who wasn't falling apart. I thought of Jasper. That was his name. The one I couldn't save, 3 years ago. Same kind of night, same look in his eyes. I'd sworn to stop doing this alone after that, but it's easy to break promises when the silence in your life is louder than your convictions. The vet came out 20 minutes later. His face was unreadable. I hated that about doctors. That practiced neutrality. "He's stable," he said. "For now. We've started fluids. He's fighting an infection. We're splinting the leg to relieve pressure." I asked what his chances were. He didn't lie. 50-50. A coin flip. But when they wheeled him out again, his eyes opened. Not wide, not bright. Just open. And when I leaned down and whispered his name, the name I hadn't said out loud until that moment, he turned his head, just slightly, and touched his nose to my wrist. "Cole," I said, because that's what he looked like. What he came from. That place of ash and soot and blackness. But Cole isn't dead. Cole is what burns. They let me sit with him while he slept. I rested my forehead on the side of the table, my hand curled around his paw. It was still too cold. His breathing wheezed through mucus and pain. But he was here, breathing still. That was enough. For now. The first morning I brought Cole home, the sky outside the kitchen window was the color of wet cement. It was one of those mornings where time feels suspended. No birdsong, no breeze. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant groan of a garbage truck. I sat on the floor next to his crate, a towel under my legs, waiting for him to wake up. He didn't. Not at first. He slept like something still half dead, curled tight, chin pressed into his chest, legs tucked awkwardly beneath him. The splint on his front leg made everything look worse, like someone had tried to repair a doll that was never meant to move again. I placed a bowl of boiled chicken near the crate, the smell rising like some desperate offering to the gods of second chances. He didn't even sniff at it. I watched the rise and fall of his breath. That was all I had for days. Breath. On the third morning, I heard a soft scrape. Not a bark, not a whine, just a single paw shifting against the crate floor. I rushed in and saw his eyes open, not searching, just aware, still cautious, still quiet. Cole never barked. Not once. Not when he heard footsteps. Not when the neighbor's dog barked through the fence. Not when I dropped a whole pan on the floor and cursed loud enough to scare myself. That silence became its own language. He lived in it, moved through it. Each day, I'd open the crate and sit nearby, book in hand, reading aloud. I didn't care if he understood. It was about rhythm, I think. Repetition. Letting him learn the sound of a voice that never shouted, never demanded, just stayed. By the end of the week, he'd inch forward when I brought the food. He'd eat only when I looked away, and sometimes I'd catch him watching me, those eyes still guarded, still distant, but no longer empty. He started limping from room to room, quiet as a shadow. I never made a move toward him. Never tried to pet him. That would come later. For now, his presence was enough. The weight of him in the corner of a room, the quiet sound of breath not taken in fear, but in rest. I made a bed for it in the sunniest spot of the house, a little rug near the sliding glass door. He found it on his own one day, dragging himself into that warm square of light and curling with a sigh so deep it shook something loose inside me. That night, I cried in the laundry room, face buried in a pile of clean towels, muffling sound, not because I was sad, but because for the first time I believed he might actually stay. Cole still didn't bark, still didn't wag his tail, but he'd started following me, quiet little footsteps behind me in the hall, like a ghost unsure whether it belonged to the living world. He'd lean against the wall near the bathroom when I showered, sit at the end of the hall when I cooked, just near enough to be close, but never to touch. And I didn't push him, because trust isn't a door you kick open. It's a window that creaks in its own time. It happened in April, the wind returning like a memory across the hills behind the house, rustling the chimes I'd forgotten I hung on the porch last year. That sound drifted into the living room like a question. Cole lifted his head. I almost didn't notice at first. It was such a small thing. But then he stood, slowly, legs trembling a bit, the healed one still stiff in the morning. But he stood, walked to the sliding glass door, and just looked. The light caught his face in that moment. His fur had started to fill in, still patchy, still uneven, but no longer dull. It shimmered in streaks like soot kissed by sunlight. His eyes reflected the yard like a place he couldn't quite name. I opened the door. He didn't move. I stepped out onto the porch and waited. And then, with a kind of holy slowness, he followed me. The first step was cautious, the second more sure, and soon he was standing on the grass, the wind flattening his ears, his head tilted up as if smelling something he hadn't felt in a long time, not just air but space, sky, possibility. He didn't run, he didn't play, but he turned his face into the wind and barked, just once. A short, hoarse little sound, barely even a bark, more like a cough wrapped in surprise. He looked startled afterward, like the sound had come from somewhere else. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I felt something break open, like a dam giving way. The tears came fast, and I didn't bother hiding them. I dropped to my knees in the grass and held my arms open, and that was the first time Cole walked toward me. He didn't leap. He didn't lick my face. He just pressed his head against my chest and let me hold him, the sound of his heart beat against mine. The wind around us, rustling the trees. Nothing else in the world mattered. After that day, Cole started learning what it meant to be alive. He chased leaves. He sniffed every corner of the backyard like it held the story of the earth. He barked at the mail truck. He took naps in ridiculous places. Upside, down on the couch, stretched out beneath the kitchen table, half in the laundry basket. He grew into himself, and I began to, too. There's something quietly redemptive about watching a creature trust the world again. It makes you believe maybe you can, too. That not every story has to end in the barn. But then came the email. A family. A couple with a daughter, a fenced yard, a love for broken things. They wanted to meet Cole. They said they were patient, that they understood trauma, that they didn't mind the silence. And suddenly the ground shifted beneath me. Because I realized I'd never once thought about giving him away. I was so focused on saving him, I never considered he might not be mine to keep. The adoption day came too fast. I packed his things in silence. The toy he finally played with, the leash he'd come to tolerate, the blanket that still smelled like the vet clinic. I folded the towel from the barn into the bottom of the box. I told myself I wasn't crying, I was preparing. Cole sat in the passenger seat again, just like that first night. Only this time he looked out the window, ears perked, face calm. He didn't shake, he didn't hide. He looked alive. We pulled in the driveway of a yellow house with a swing on the porch. The little girl stood on the steps, holding a tennis ball in both hands like it was some ancient artifact. She didn't run to us, just watched. Cole watched her too. I let him out slowly, let the leash hang loose. He walked over to her on his own. She knelt, didn't speak, just held out the ball. And Cole, quiet, beautiful Cole, walked forward and nudged it with his nose. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him and run. But I didn't, because I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Peace. Not the fragile kind, the kind that lives in the bones. The couple thanked me, hugged me. I barely heard them. Before I left, I knelt down, looked Cole in the eye. "Thank you," I whispered, "for staying." He licked my cheek once, the only time he ever did. Then he turned away, walked back toward the porch, and didn't look back. That night, the house felt impossibly quiet, too big, too still. I sat on the floor where his crate used to be and waited for the silence to crush me. But it didn't. It felt light. Not empty, not gone. Just lighter, like something had been lifted. That night I didn't cry. Instead, I dreamed of him, running, barking free. And when I woke, the first light of morning touched the floor in the same spot he used to sleep. It was enough. He had come from darkness, but he'd left behind light. And sometimes that's how the story ends. Not with goodbye, but with the weight of something beautiful finally being set down. The house stayed quiet for a while after Cole left. It wasn't an absence you could hear. It was one you felt. In the floorboards, in the long shadows that stretched across the hallway at dusk, in the stillness of the morning when I didn't have to boil chicken or warm a towel or whisper a name into the silence. The routine of rescue leaves imprints. Ghosts of gestures. I still found myself standing too long by the fridge, waiting for a sound that wasn't coming. I cleaned the crate, though I didn't need to. I vacuumed the rug by the door, though I couldn't bring myself to roll it up. For the first few nights, I kept the porch light on out of habit, maybe, or hope, or just ritual, as if part of me still expected to hear his nails clicking softly across the kitchen tile at midnight, looking for water or warmth or my hand. But instead, there was only stillness, the kind that didn't ache anymore, the kind that whispered you did your part. A week later, I got an email. It had no subject line, just a photo. Cole, lying belly up in a sunbeam, tongue out, the little girl curled beside him, using his side like a pillow. Her hand rested gently on his healed front leg. No caption, no explanation. It didn't need one. I stared at the image until the screen dimmed. Then I clicked it open again, zoomed in on his eyes. They weren't the same. Not dulled, not shut down. Wide, bright, unburdened. That was the moment I knew I hadn't saved him. Not really. He had saved himself. All I'd done was hold the light steady long enough for him to find the way out. Spring passed, then summer. The chimes on the porch rattled louder as the winds grew warmer. I started going back to the shelter more often. At first, just for paperwork, then for feeding shifts, then to meet a dog that had been pulled from a dumpster outside a motel. And suddenly, I was doing intake again. Sitting on the floor with another trembling creature, watching their eyes flicker between flight and surrender. I told myself I wouldn't get attached, that I wouldn't name them. That Cole was the exception. But I caught myself, days later, humming the same lullaby I used to sing under my breath when he couldn't sleep. The new dog tilted its head, and I smiled, because maybe that's what healing really is. Not the absence of pain, but the quiet readiness to begin again. There's a photograph I keep on my fridge now. It's not the one of Cole on the porch, or the day he met his family, or even the last time he curled against me before I let go. It's the one from that first night. Taken by accident, my phone had glitched when I leaned over the vet table and brushed his paw. The image is blurry, dim, the lighting terrible, but his eyes are open, and my hand is there, resting on his broken leg. And between us, a small line of light, not much, just enough. And sometimes that's all you need. A breath, a whisper, a single thread of light in the dark. It had been almost 2 months since Cole left, and the world outside had shifted again. Late summer in the countryside brings a strange hush, everything swollen with heat, fields faded gold, cicadas humming like 1,000 tiny engines running in the dirt. The wind had gone quiet again, but this time it didn't feel ominous, just settled, like the world was holding its breath in peace, not pain. I was sitting on the porch one evening, the one he'd first walked across with stiff leg grace, and the light was falling just right through the railing slats, turning the floorboards into stripes of warmth and shadow. I remembered how he used to lie right there, chin on the edge, watching the wind move through the grass. Watching, not waiting. That distinction had always meant something. I had my coffee, a folded blanket beside me, and no plan for the rest of the day. The The kind of stillness that used to feel unbearable now sat with me like an old friend. I realized I was finally learning how to be alone without being hollow. And then the phone buzzed. It was a short video. Cole running. Full speed, no limp. The little girl, her name was June, I'd learned, was chasing behind him, laughing, holding a red leash that flapped uselessly in the wind. She wasn't trying to Troy him, just trying to keep up. And he didn't look back once. I watched it on loop, my thumb resting on the replay button like a prayer bead. He wasn't surviving anymore. He was living. Really, wildly fully. The way we always want to, but rarely allow ourselves. And something about that, it cracked me open again in the best way. I went into the back room of the house and opened the closet. The crate was still there, disassembled and leaned against the wall. I took it out, wiped the dust from its bars, laid down a fresh towel. Not because I needed to use it right then, but because I was ready, because the house felt like it had space again, like I had space again. The weight I'd been carrying, the quiet, invisible grief that creeps in after every goodbye, it had softened, not vanished, just learned how to live alongside joy. That's the thing they don't tell you about rescue. It doesn't stop at the save. You don't just pull them out of the dark. You invite the dark in with them. You learn to hold it without flinching, and slowly, quietly, it becomes something else. It becomes part of the light. A few weeks later, I got a call from the shelter. A litter of strays had been dropped off in the middle of the night. Malnourished, skittish, possibly dumped after the mother died. No names. No history. I showed up an hour before my shift, coffee in one hand, the same towel from the barn in the other. One pup in particular wouldn't stop shaking. Small, sandy-colored, with wide, terrified eyes that reminded me of the first time I saw Cole in that collapsed heap of darkness. But this one growled when I reached out. A whisper of fear masked as threat. I didn't flinch. I just sat down on the floor, waited. The air around us was thick with panic. But I didn't try to fix it. I just breathed. Eventually, the pup leaned forward, just slightly, nose twitching, and there it was, that sacred beginning, not a bark, not a tail wag, just the decision to stay. I named him Ash, not because he was broken, but because ashes mean the fire was real. And from ashes things grow. I still get updates from Cole's family. The photos now show him on hikes, sprawled on blankets at the park, wearing silly hats on his birthday. June holds him like a sibling. He lets her paint his paws with safe dye and pose him beside paper crowns and cardboard castles. They say he sleeps in her bed every night. Doesn't like to be apart from her. That he still only barks when he has something important to say. He's learned joy, learned safety, learned belonging. But what I love most, what brings me to tears more than anything, is this: they stopped calling him a rescue. They just call him theirs. I once found a puppy in a barn, barely breathing. He didn't run, didn't cry, just closed his eyes and let the dark fold in. And I almost believed that was the end of the story. But he was never just a rescue. He was a return, a reminder that even the smallest flicker of life in the deepest dark can still burn into something beautiful. The wind had changed again. It came softer now, not howling like it had the night I first found him in that cold barn, but brushing gently across the porch like a fingertip tracing memory. It carried with it the smell of warm soil and distant wood smoke, the kind of scent that makes you pause without knowing why. I leaned back in the old wooden chair where I had sat with Cole so many times and watched light fall low across the hills. It had been exactly a year since I let him go. They say you're supposed to move on. That rescue work is about cycles. In, out, healed, adopted. But that's a lie told by people who don't stay long enough to know the sound of a dog finally exhaling in safety. Who haven't watched a creature too broken to bark find its voice again? Who haven't knelt in the grass, arms open, and waited heart wide enough to break, and still believe that maybe, just maybe, this time will be different. Cole was different. Even now, I still catch glimpses of him, not ghosts exactly, more like echoes, in the shape of the light across the rug where he used to sleep, in the squeak of a toy left under the couch, in the way the front door creaks open, and for a split second I turn expecting to see his face there, quiet, watching, waiting like he used to. But what haunts me more than the memories is this: the silence he behind doesn't hurt anymore. It used to be unbearable. That silence, the one that follows the letting go, would fill every crack in the house until it rang in my ears. But now it feels like space, not emptiness, not absence, just a quiet room where peace decided to stay. And that matters, because before Cole, peace wasn't something I trusted. It felt like a trick, like the calm before a storm that never failed to arrive. I lived waiting for the next heartbreak, the next broken thing, the next goodbye. But Cole didn't just survive his own story. He changed mine. The last video I got from his family was only 6 seconds long. June, the little girl, was curled on the living room carpet, surrounded by crayon drawings and scraps of pink construction paper. Cole lay beside her, head resting on her lap. She wasn't petting him. She wasn't holding him. She was just there. And so was peace. No fear in his eyes. No tension in his shoulders. No signs of the broken, silent animal I had found in a pile of barn straw a lifetime ago. Just belonging, simple, ordinary belonging. I watched that video on repeat one night, sitting in the laundry room again, the same room where I'd once muffled my grief into clean towels. Only this time I didn't cry. I smiled, because this was always the end I wanted, not the dramatic rescue or the Instagram-worthy transformation, but this: a dog asleep in a child's lap, in a home where he is neither novelty nor burden, just family. People always ask why I keep doing this. They hear one story, maybe Cole's, and they say, "I don't know how you do it. I could never let them go." And I understand that. I do. Letting go feels like tearing off a limb every time. You fall in love with creatures that don't belong to you, pour every ounce of yourself into piecing them back together, and then just hand them off. But what they don't see is the moment after. The moment when you watch them run toward something they never thought they'd have. A home, a name, a forever. And it's not about you anymore. That's the secret. True rescue isn't about saving someone. It's about giving them the chance to become something you were never meant to keep. There's a new dog in the house now. Ash. Found him in the back of a rusted trailer behind a shuttered motel, wrapped in a sheet that smelled like mildew and fear. He growled when I picked him up. Low, teeth bared, eyes wild with memory. But I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. I just whispered, "You're safe now," and carried him home wrapped in the same towel I'd used for Cole. He sleeps in the same spot now. At first I worried it would feel wrong, like overriding something sacred. But the first time Ash curled into that patch of light and let out a sigh that shook his whole body, I realized something important. That patch of light doesn't belong to any one of them. It belongs to the becoming. The space where a creature learns it doesn't have to flinch, where a heart begins to beat with more curiosity than fear, where silence stops meaning danger and starts meaning peace. I still keep Cole's collar in a drawer, not as a relic, not as a wound, but as a reminder that even the most forgotten things, the ones left to die in barns or trailers or broken homes, can become part of something whole again, that the smallest breath in the darkest place can still grow into a life worth living. That survival is not the end of the story. It's the beginning. Sometimes at night, when the world is quiet and the chimes on the porch ring softly in the breeze, I imagine him, not how I found him. Not lying in the dark, breath shallow, body broken, but how he was the last time I saw him, running across a green lawn, tail high, eyes forward, wind in his ears. And I don't call after him. I don't ask him to stop. I just watch. Let him go. Because that's what love looks like sometimes. Not holding on, but opening your hand and letting the light you once carried fly.